The question, when it came, was as soft as the summer twilight settling over our small garden, yet it landed with the force of a physical blow. "Mom?" Lily asked, her voice barely a whisper as she looked up from the dandelion she was about to blow. "Why does Grandma Evelyn never call me?" I paused, my hand frozen on the handle of the watering can. The world seemed to shrink to the space between us, to the innocent, questioning blue of her eyes so much like her grandmother's. For 7 years, I had built a careful world for Lily, a world of bedtime stories, scraped knees, and unwavering love. In that world, her grandmother existed as a smiling black-and-white photograph on my bedside table, a benevolent ghost who lived far away and was, as I always vaguely put it, not very good with phones. But children, especially ones as perceptive as Lily, have a way of seeing the cracks in the walls we build. My carefully constructed ambiguity was no longer enough. The real reason for Evelyn's silence wasn't a simple aversion to technology. It was sealed in a cold, sterile safe deposit box at the downtown bank, a box I hadn't opened in nearly a decade. Inside, nestled amongst old bonds and a few pieces of heirloom jewelry, was a stack of letters written in a familiar, elegant script, and a truth I wasn't sure my daughter or I was ready to face. I forced a smile, the muscles in my face feeling stiff and unnatural. "Oh, sweetie," I began, my voice straining to sound casual. "You know how it is with older people. Grandma she's very private. She shows her love in different ways." Lily's brow furrowed. She blew on the dandelion, sending a flurry of white seeds drifting into the evening air. "But she doesn't send letters either. Or birthday cards. Chloe's grandma sends her a new dress every year for her birthday." The comparison was gentle, without a hint of accusation, which only made it hurt more. She wasn't being greedy. She was trying to understand a void in her life that I had created. My heart ached with a familiar dual-edged pain, the pain of my own unresolved history with my mother, and the fresh, sharp pain of seeing that history cast a shadow over my own child. I had always told myself I was protecting her. I was shielding her from the complexities, the heartbreak, the conditional nature of a love I had known all too well. I wanted Lily's childhood to be a sun-drenched landscape, untroubled by the storms that had defined my own. But as I looked at her small, thoughtful face, illuminated by the last rays of sun, I realized that my protection was beginning to feel like a lie. My silence wasn't a shield. It was a wall. And behind it, I wasn't just hiding the truth about Evelyn. I was hiding pieces of myself. "Maybe," I said, setting the watering can down with a soft thud. I sat on the grass beside her, the dampness seeping through my jeans. "Maybe it's time I told you a little more about her. About us." Her eyes lit up with a pure, uncomplicated hope that both warmed and terrified me. "Really?" I took a deep breath, the scent of cut grass and impending rain filling my lungs. I couldn't take her to the bank. I couldn't open that box and read those letters aloud. Not yet. But I could start. I could lay the first stone on a path toward the truth. I owed her that. I owed myself that. The ghost in the photograph deserved a voice, even if it was one I had to borrow for her. The story of why Grandma Evelyn never called was my story too, and it was long past time I started to tell it. "Really?" Lily's voice was a spark in the gathering dark. "Really," I affirmed, my own voice gaining a sliver of confidence I didn't feel. I gathered my thoughts, searching for a beginning that wasn't a lie, but wasn't the whole truth either. The whole truth was a tangled knot of pride, disappointment, and words that could never be unsaid. The story for a 7-year-old had to be simpler. "Well," I started, pulling my knees to my chest. "Your Grandma Evelyn, she wasn't like other moms. Not like me, or Chloe's mom. She was a different kind of person. She was a musician, a very, very talented one, a concert pianist. This much was true. The black and white photograph on my nightstand was from a concert program, showing a younger Evelyn with her dark hair swept up, her hands poised over the keys of a grand piano, a rare, brilliant smile on her face. She played the piano? Lily's eyes widened. We didn't have a piano. The closest we came was the small, colorful xylophone she'd had since she was a toddler. She did, beautifully. When she played, it was like she was telling a story with her hands. The music could be happy and bright, like sunshine dancing on water, or it could be sad and stormy, like a thunderstorm in the middle of the night. I could still feel the vibrations of the music through the floorboards of our old house, a sound that was both a comfort and a wall. When she was playing, she was in a world of her own, and there was no room for me. She spent a lot of time practicing, I continued, choosing my words with the care of a bomb disposal expert. To be that good at something, you have to give it almost all of your time. So, she traveled a lot for concerts, playing in big, fancy halls in faraway cities, and when she was home, she needed a lot of quiet to think about her music. It was the most important thing in the world to her. I was painting a picture of a dedicated artist, a woman of singular passion. It was a more romantic version of the truth, which was a house ruled by silence, where a child's laughter was a disruption, where "I need to practice" was a sentence that ended all conversations. I was trying to explain her absence without explaining the coldness that came with it. "So she was too busy to call?" Lily asked, connecting the dots I had so carefully laid out for her. "Exactly. It's not that she didn't love me or that she wouldn't love you," I said quickly, the words tumbling out. "It's just that her love was for the music, and she believed the best way to love me was to be the best musician she could be. It was how she showed her worth. It was her gift to the world." My own words tasted like ash. Her gift to the world had felt like a punishment to me, a constant reminder that I was secondary. The letters in the safe deposit box were not fan mail from adoring concert-goers. They were from me, years of them. Desperate, childish scrawls at first, then angry, teenage manifestos, and finally, a single, carefully worded letter from a young woman about to have a child of her own, a final plea for a connection that went unanswered. Lily was quiet for a long time, tracing a pattern in the dew-damp grass with her finger. The fireflies had started their silent, blinking dance around us. "So she doesn't call me," Lily said finally, her voice small and logical. "Because she's still busy with her music?" I hesitated. Here was the chasm between the story I was telling and the present day. The truth was, Evelyn hadn't performed in over a decade. Her career had ended abruptly, a fact I never spoke of. The silence from her end wasn't because of a concert tour. It was a choice, renewed every single day. "Yes," I lied, the word feeling heavy and foreign on my tongue. "She is." I felt a pang of guilt so sharp it was dizzying. I had started this to bridge a gap between Lily and her grandmother, but instead I was building a new, more elaborate facade. I was replacing the benevolent ghost with a fictional, globe-trotting artist. It was a better story, but it was a story nonetheless. Lily nodded slowly, as if processing a complex new idea. "Okay," she said. She didn't sound sad anymore, just thoughtful. She stood up, brushed the grass from her shorts, and gave me a quick, warm hug. "Thanks for telling me, Mom." She ran off toward the back porch, her small figure silhouetted against the warm light spilling from the kitchen. I stayed on the lawn, the evening chill seeping into my bones. The simple "okay" was more unsettling than 100 questions. It felt like an acceptance, but not of the story I had told. It felt as if she had accepted a piece of a puzzle, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the core, that she would soon be looking for the rest. I had opened a door, just a crack, but I was the one who was terrified of what lay on the other side. The lie, once told, did not settle quietly. It took on a life of its own, a restless energy that hummed just beneath the surface of our peaceful domestic world. Lily, for her part, seemed to have accepted the story of the brilliant, busy pianist. She stopped asking questions about phone calls and birthday cards, but she began to do something else, something that I found far more unnerving. She started to search for the music. It began subtly. I'd hear her humming little made-up melodies to herself as she played with her dolls. When I asked what she was humming, she'd say, "It's a piano song. For Grandma." Each little tune was a fresh stab of guilt. I had grown up in a house where my own childish noises were shushed into non-existence to preserve the sanctity of my mother's art. To see my daughter, in her innocence, trying to create a bridge to her grandmother, using the very thing that had always been a barrier between us, was an irony so sharp it felt like a cruelty. A week after our talk in the garden, I came home from the grocery store to find Lily sitting at the kitchen table with my tablet, her brow furrowed in concentration. She was in the search bar carefully typing, letter by letter, EVELYNREEDPIANIST. My blood ran cold. The bags of groceries slipped from my grasp, apples and a carton of milk thudding onto the linoleum floor. "Lily, what are you doing?" My voice was sharper than I intended, laced with a panic I couldn't conceal. She jumped, startled, and looked at me with wide, innocent eyes. "I just wanted to hear her play," she said, her voice small. "You said it was like telling a story." I wanted to hear one of her stories. I rushed over and closed the tablet, my hands trembling. It's not on there, sweetie. Her music is very old. It's not on the internet." "Oh," she said, her face falling with disappointment. But the seed was planted. The internet was a magic box that held everything. My excuse was flimsy, and we both knew it. The lie was unraveling. The story of the globe-trotting artist was a fragile fantasy that a single search query could shatter. Because a search for Evelyn Reed's name wouldn't bring up concertos and sonatas. It would bring up headlines. It would bring up the scandal, the public disgrace, the reason her career had imploded, leaving behind not a legacy of beautiful music, but a crater of silence and shame. The silence wasn't because of her dedication to her art. It was because of its violent end. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the smiling woman in the black and white photograph. The benevolent ghost I had presented to Lily was a fiction. The real Evelyn was a woman I barely understood myself, a woman whose love and ambition were tangled into a weapon that had wounded everyone in its path, most of all herself. The reason for her silence was not in her past glory, but in her present shame. My protection of Lily had been a form of cowardice. I wasn't just shielding her from the truth about her grandmother, I was shielding myself from it, from the anger I still felt, from the pity that was even worse, from the quiet, agonizing question that had haunted me for years. Was it my fault? The letters in the safe deposit box held the answer. I had written them, pouring my heart out onto the page, but I had never dared to reread them. I had never dared to look at the narrative of my own heartbreak laid out in black and white. I had told Lily a story. Now I had to face the real one. I sat up in bed, the decision settling over me with the grim weight of inevitability. I couldn't keep patching the holes in a story that was doomed to sink. I couldn't wait for Lily to stumble upon the ugly truth on a screen. I had to be the one to tell her. But to do that, I first had to arm myself with the full story. I had to face the ghosts I had locked away. The next morning, after dropping Lily at school, I didn't drive to work. I drove downtown. I drove to the bank. The key to the safe deposit box felt cold and heavy in my purse, a key to a past I had tried to bury. It was time to open the box. It was time to read the letters. The bank vault was colder than I remembered, the air still and sterile. A polite young man with a freshly pressed suit led me to the wall of gleaming metal boxes, his footsteps echoing softly in the cathedral-like silence. The silence here was different from the one I grew up with. This was a silence of security, of things locked away and protected. The silence of my childhood had been a living thing, a demanding presence that suffocated sound. He used his key, then mine. The small metal door swung open with a heavy, satisfying click. I slid the long, narrow box out from its tomb and carried it to a private viewing room, my heart hammering against my ribs. I hadn't touched this box since the day I'd closed it, just after Lily was born, sealing away a final, unanswered letter and a hope I could no longer afford to carry. I sat down and lifted the lid. The air that escaped smelled of old paper and faint, forgotten perfume. On top was a velvet roll containing a few pieces of my grandmother's jewelry, things Evelyn had inherited but never wore. Beneath it, just as I knew they would be, was the stack of my own letters, bundled in a faded red ribbon, my life story in unanswered pleas. There was the childish scrawl demanding, "When are you coming home?" The tear-stained teenage pages filled with accusations, the crisp, adult stationery of my last attempt, informing her she was going to be a grandmother. But there was something else tucked underneath, a thick manila envelope I didn't recognize. My name was written on the front in my mother's elegant, slanting script. It wasn't a letter, it felt too bulky. My fingers trembled as I tore open the clasp. It wasn't a letter to me. It was a collection of documents. The top one was a photocopy of a news article from a major music journal, dated 11 years ago. The headline read, "Evelyn Reed, Genius in Flames, star pianist abruptly cancels world tour amid rumors of breakdown." The article detailed her erratic behavior, her artistic temperament, turning into outright hostility, culminating in her walking off stage in the middle of a performance in Vienna. It painted her as a diva, a fallen star whose own genius had consumed her. This was the scandal I feared Lily would find. But it was what lay beneath the article that stopped my breath. It was a medical file. A diagnosis, printed in stark clinical letters. Severe rheumatoid arthritis. Page after page detailed the aggressive progression of the disease. Joint inflammation, chronic pain, prognosis, a rapid and irreversible loss of fine motor control in the hands. My mother hadn't walked away from her music. It had been stolen from her. The one thing that had defined her, the one thing she had sacrificed everything for, her family, her daughter, had been taken away in the most brutal fashion imaginable. Her hands, those conduits of genius, had betrayed her. Suddenly, her silence wasn't a cold, calculated rejection. It was the sound of a woman screaming into a void. The erratic behavior, the breakdown. It was the rage and grief of a life's work turning to dust in her hands. She hadn't shut me out because she didn't love me. She had shut the whole world out because she could no longer bear to be Evelyn Reed, the concert pianist. Without her music, she believed she was nothing. To face the world, to face me, would be to face the ghost of who she used to be every single day. The final item in the envelope was a single, unsent letter. It was addressed to me, dated a week after Lily was born. The handwriting was shockingly different from the elegant script on the envelope. It was shaky, labored, a painful scrawl that was almost illegible. "My dearest Anna," it began, "I received your letter. A girl. Lily. A beautiful name. I look at this photograph of her you sent, and I see your eyes, and I see my hands. Not as they are, but as they were. I cannot be her grandmother. The woman who played Brahms is gone. This broken creature who is left cannot bear to see her legacy in a world she can no longer be a part of. The silence is not for you. It is for her. A child should not have to know such a ghost. Forgive me." The anger I had nurtured for 2 decades collapsed. It didn't just fade. It evaporated in a sudden, wrenching wave of grief and understanding. It was replaced by an image so clear it felt like a memory. My mother, alone in her silent house, her famous hands curled into fists of pain, staring at a picture of the granddaughter she would never meet. Her silence wasn't a wall she had built to keep me out. It was the crumbling ruins of a fortress she had built around herself, and she was trapped inside. I gathered the papers, my hands moving with a newfound purpose. The story I had to tell Lily was no longer a lie I had to maintain. It was a truth I had to share. It was more complicated and more painful than the fiction I had created, but it was also a story of love, of loss, and of a sadness so profound it had stolen a grandmother from her family. I left the bank, the cold air of the vault feeling like a distant memory. I was no longer a daughter nursing a wound. I was a mother who had to explain one. I knew with absolute clarity that our next conversation would not be in the garden. It would be on the road, driving toward a silent house, to face a ghost who was not a monster, but a woman who had simply forgotten how to be anything else. When I picked Lily up from school, the usual cheerful chaos of children bursting from classrooms felt distant, a muffled sound from another world. My own world had tilted on its axis. Lily ran to me, her backpack bouncing, her face bright with stories of her day. "Mom, you'll never guess what—" she started, but then she stopped, her smile faltering as she looked at my face. "Are you okay? You look sad." I knelt, taking her small hands in mine. "I do feel a little sad," I admitted, "but it's a changing kind of sad. I went to the bank today, Lily. I found out why Grandma Evelyn doesn't play the piano anymore, and why she's been so quiet. I wouldn't use words like arthritis or scandal. The truth for a child needed a simpler shape. You know how a dancer needs their feet to dance and a singer needs their voice to sing? A pianist needs their hands. Grandma's hands got sick. They started to hurt, and they wouldn't do what her brain told them to do anymore. The music stopped, and it made her so sad that she felt like she had to be quiet. She felt like if she wasn't a great piano player, she couldn't be a great anything. Not even a grandmother." Lily's brow furrowed, not with confusion, but with a startlingly pure form of empathy. "Her hands hurt?" she asked, her voice soft. "But she's still my grandma." My heart swelled, threatening to crack open right there on the school playground. "Yes, she is," I said, my voice thick with emotion. I think maybe she forgot that. And I think maybe I did too. How would you feel about we take a drive? We can go and help her remember." Lily didn't need to answer. Her fierce, determined nod was enough. The drive was 3 hours long, through familiar highways that unspooled into the quiet country roads of my childhood. I hadn't made this journey in 7 years. With every mile, the anger and resentment I used to feel dissolved further, replaced by a nervous, protective energy. I felt like I was bringing Lily a gift, and bringing a gift to my mother too. The gift of a grandchild's uncomplicated love, a love that had nothing to do with fame or talent. We found her house just as I remembered it, a handsome old Victorian set back from the road, but now it seemed to sag slightly, as if weary. The gardens were overgrown, the paint peeling in places. It was a house that was holding its breath. We walked up the path, my hand on Lily's shoulder, both of us drawing strength from the other. I knocked on the heavy oak door. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then the sound of a lock turning, and the door creaked open. The woman standing there was a ghost, but not the one from the photograph. Evelyn Reed was smaller than I remembered, her dark hair now streaked with silver and pulled back messily. Her face was etched with lines of pain and solitude, but her eyes were the same, wide, intelligent, and currently filled with a mixture of shock and terror. She looked at me, then her gaze fell to the small girl standing beside me, and she physically recoiled, her hand gripping the doorframe as if for support. "Anna," she breathed, her voice raspy from disuse. "Hello, Mom," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "This is Lily." Lily, bless her courageous heart, did not hide behind my legs. She looked right at the strange, sad woman in the doorway and gave a small, shy wave. "Hi, Grandma." My mother flinched at the word. She looked at her own hands, which were curled slightly at her sides, the knuckles swollen and red. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered, her eyes pleading with me. "There's nothing for you here." "We're not here for a concert," I said gently. I took a step forward, closing the space between us. "We're here for you." I reached out and took her hand. She tried to pull it back, out of shame, but I held on. It was warm, and I could feel the inflammation, the rigidness of her joints. It was the hand of a person in pain. "Lily knows your hands hurt," I said, my voice soft. "She doesn't care." And then, the most extraordinary thing happened. Lily stepped forward past me. She looked at her grandmother's tormented hand, the one I was still holding. Then she reached out with her own small, perfect hand and gently placed it over her grandmother's. She didn't say a word. She just held it, a small, warm press of flesh against flesh, a bridge across a decade of silence. A single tear tracked its way down my mother's cheek, then another. She didn't make a sound, but her body shook with a silent, racking sob she had clearly been holding in for years. The fortress was crumbling. The ghost was becoming a person again. She slowly, painfully, uncurled the fingers of her other hand and rested it on top of Lily's, sandwiching my daughter's hand between her own. Her eyes met mine over Lily's head, and in them I saw it all. The apology, the regret, the suffocating grief, and a tiny, fragile flicker of hope. The story of why Grandma Evelyn never called was a sad one, born of loss and misplaced shame. But it wasn't the end of the story. Standing there in the dusty doorway, with my daughter's hand connecting me to my mother, I knew, with absolute certainty, that we were at a new beginning. The silence was finally broken, not by the grand crescendo of a piano, but by the quiet, perfect weight of a granddaughter's touch. And for the first time in a very long time, the house did not feel empty. It felt like home.